This is an ancient Sankhya Vedanta meditation that Swami Vivekananda gave in his Raja Yoga classes. So let us sit straight. If you're on the floor, that's fine, seated cross-legged. Spine should be straight because the spiritual current travels along the spine. Sit in a relaxed mood and take in 3 deep breaths, breathing in deeply and exhaling completely. Picture the mind as a calm lake stretched before you. Let the mind drift. See how thoughts come and go as bubbles, rising and breaking on the surface, becoming ripples that are ever widening circles. Make no effort to control your thoughts, but watch them. Follow them in imagination as they rise, break, and float away. I am not the mind. I see that I am thinking. I am watching my mind act. Hold fast to the idea. I am the witness, watching my mind drift. The mind is not I. Watch the mind as a thing entirely apart from yourself. Identify yourself with God, never with the mind or matter. Be the witness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Today is, we're resuming our Gita series, Krishna Speaks to You. And this is, we're going to be embarking on the 14th chapter. I will be using the text by Pravrajika and Isherwood, but if you want to bring your own Gita to the class, that's perfectly fine, and follow along. Getting to know the 3 Gunas. Why do we study the Bhagavad Gita? Well, it's considered one of the Prasthana Traya texts, one of the 3 most sacred texts of Hinduism, which means it's a living scripture, along with the 10 major Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras. So then we may ask, what does it mean to be a living text? Because it embodies a higher level of consciousness within its pages. Sri Krishna's words come alive to us as we read it. And as we grow in our spiritual lives and we read it again and again, certain passages stand out and touch our hearts. So how then should we read and study this sacred text? Swami Bhaskhareshwarananda, whom I never met, but he was a disciple of Swami Shivananda, who had a spiritual vision. Swami Shivananda had a spiritual vision of the famous Nagpur Center in India before it was ever built, and sent his disciple, Swami Bhaskhareshwarananda, to witness and be the instrument in seeing how that vision of Nagpur later unfolded. So this Swami was a great Swami. And once he was asked how to study the Gita, he replied, "When you open the Gita, remember who is speaking to me. And remember, why am I seeking? I am seeking God." We ended chapter 13, the field and its knower, on a very, very high note. Sri Krishna divulged the mystery behind this entire creation. The seeming union of the knower of the field, Brahman, with the field, Prakriti, this universe, this world around us. But we naturally ask, how can Brahman, that which is undivided and non-material, be merged with matter? How can that be? The Sankhya system of philosophy gives us a dualistic perspective because within that philosophy, within that system, there are two ultimate realities, Purusa and Prakriti. On a cosmic level, the whole universe, Sankhya tells us, is produced by the proximity of Purusa, pure consciousness, with Prakriti, primordial nature, composed of the three Gunas. Just as a clear crystal, Purusa, seems to change its color as a red hibiscus flower, Prakriti comes near it. Vedanta gives us another monistic perspective, which Swami Vivekananda shares with us. He said, "The world is God and is real, but that is not the world we see. Just as we see silver in the mother of pearl, where it is not. This is what is known as adhyasa, or superimposition. That is a relative existence dependent on a real one, taking the thing for what it is not. We see reality, but distorted by the medium through which we see it, which is our ignorance." So that is the distorted lens we all share. But when the day comes that we see God, the divine self within ourselves, we see that same God existing in every creature and object, not just as a part of God, but as the whole of infinite reality, Brahman. Hundreds of years later, Jesus proclaimed this truth to the Jews in his own way. In John 10:34, "Is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods?" Swami Prabhavananda, he shared this realization comes when we experience the identity of ourself with Brahman. And when we return to normal consciousness, we realize that what we experienced within our own heart as a center of the whole universe exists everywhere in every being. Swami Vivekananda described this experience. He said, "Look at the ocean and not at the wave. See no difference between the ant and the angel. Every worm is the brother of the Nazarene. How say one is greater and one less? Each is great in its own place. We are in the sun and in the stars as much as here." Now, this is a radical truth. which Naran, the future Vivekananda, at first resisted and privately ridiculed Sri Ramakrishna to his friend Hazra when Sri Ramakrishna was expounding this great truth. Until one day, Sri Ramakrishna touched Naran, and Naran went into samadhi. And the effect of that touch on Naran brought a complete change over his mind. All is Brahman. Vivekananda described, I was astounded to find that really there was nothing in the universe but God. I saw it clearly. I returned home, but there too, everything I saw appeared to be Brahman. I sat down to take my meal, but found that everything, the food, the plate, the person who served, and even myself was nothing but that. While walking in the streets, he went on, I noticed cabs plying, but I did not feel inclined to move out of the way. I felt that the cabs and myself were of one stuff. There was no sensation in my limbs, which seemed to be becoming paralyzed. Our teachers tell us, with this realization, we become the center of the universe, where there is no more I or you. If we can focus and become absorbed in our consciousness there, we can reach the heart of God, beyond time, space, and causation. In the Gita, 13th chapter, verse 29, Krishna tells us, who sees all action ever performed alone by Prakriti, that man sees truly, the Atman is actless. So as ordinary people, we feel we are acting, all of us, good and evil. But that feeling comes from a false sense of individuality. In actuality, yes, we perform actions, good and bad, but the indwelling self, our true nature, is unaffected. And that is Vedanta's philosophical basis for a very important corollary truth. There is no eternal damnation. Swami Prabhupada explains, though people may commit terrible deeds for which they suffer in this and future lifetimes, that suffering will awaken them. And through spiritual practice, their divine nature will gradually unfold. Then in verse 31, Krishna speaks to us. Not subject to change is the infinite Atman, without beginning, beyond the Gunas. Therefore, O Prince, speaking to Arjuna, though it dwells in the body, it acts not nor feels the fruits of our actions. So the self is said to dwell in the body because the self is manifested in the body, yet it does not act. Now for the jnani, it is his or her Prakriti that acts. When they are established in jnana, they know that. So how does a seer observe the seemingly paradoxical state of inaction in action? We turn to the second chapter, verse 70, and Krishna explains, water flows continually into the ocean, but the ocean is never disturbed. Desire flows into the mind of the seer, but he is never disturbed. The seer knows peace. The man who stirs up his own lusts can never know peace. Our teachers tell us seers who have detached themselves from the ever-changing Gunas know themselves to be one with the unchangeable Brahman. That's how it works. When they return to normal consciousness, they may act like ordinary people, and they do, but they retain that inward awareness all the time. Though engaged in action, a seer knows it is the working of the Gunas and remains utterly detached and tranquil as the witness. So now we come to chapter 14. What are the Gunas? In this chapter, Sri Krishna instructs Arjuna on the nature of the Gunas and their relevance to us in spiritual life. In verse 1 and 2, Sri Krishna speaks. Once more I shall teach you that uttermost wisdom. The sages who found it were all made perfect, escaping the bonds of the body. In that wisdom they lived, made one with my holy nature. Now they are not reborn when a new age begins, nor have they any part in its dissolution. Okay. In that wisdom they lived, made one with my holy nature. What does that mean? The interpretation of this verse depends upon a particular school of Vedanta we follow. From the seer philosopher Shankara's non-dualistic perspective, supreme wisdom means union with the absolute, to know I am that, Tattvamasi. I am Brahman. But dualistic commentators explain Krishna's words that the supreme wisdom means union with the absolute, made one with my holy nature, to mean the seer who has merged with Brahman, yet retained some distinction from Brahman. Merged, but not completely. Such a soul then continues to live in the world, imbued with divine qualities of Brahman with attributes, as Jesus described. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. So this perfected soul may also receive certain divine powers. We know in studying the Yoga Sutras that powers do come to the yogi, except those of the Ishvara. There's a difference between the yogi and Ishvara, the personal God, and that power is in the hands of the personal God alone. Creation, preservation, and destruction of the universe. So ordinary spiritual aspirants who attain higher levels of wisdom can become one with God, but they can never become the same as God. Swami Vivekananda explained this difference between the individual, the jiva, and Ishvara, the personal God, with this example. He said, out of a mass of clay, a huge elephant of clay is manufactured. And out of the same clay, a little clay mouse is made. Would the clay mouse ever be able to become the clay elephant? But put them both in water, and they are both clay. As clay, they are both one. But as mouse and elephant, there will be an eternal difference between them. The infinite, the impersonal, is like the clay in the example. When Sri Krishna says, now they are not reborn when a new age begins, nor have they any part in its dissolution, referring to the illumined souls, our commentators tell us that the knowers of Brahman look on the dissolution of the universe as the witness, not subjected to nature. He or she has gone beyond the three gunas. In verse 3 and 4, Sri Krishna speaks to us. Prakriti, this vast womb, I quicken into birth with the seed of all life. Thence, O son of Bharata, the many creatures spring. Many are the forms of the living, many the wombs that bear them. Prakriti, the womb of all wombs, and I, the seed-giving father. So this I, the seed-giving father, is Purusa, the divine self. Purusa literally means he who dwells within the city, meaning this human body. Krishna has also referred to the body as a city of 9 gates in chapter 5. And he refers, meaning the gates refer to the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, the mouth, and the organs of excretion and generation. And through these gates, we're drawn outward into creation, rather than inward into the divine self. Sankhya, the Sankhya system of philosophy, calls this creation Prakriti, and the Vedanta philosophy calls it Maya. In the Gita, these 2 words are sometimes used interchangeably, though they represent subtle philosophical differences. The Gita also refers to creation as kshetra, the field. Maya not only is creation, but also ignorance, or the cosmic illusion. Shankara explains that in our state of ignorance, which is ordinary consciousness, creation is real because we experience it through our senses, and it exists as it appears. But in the state of illumination, creation is not experienced, and it ceases to exist like a dream, which ends when we awake. Sri Ramakrishna beautifully illustrated this truth with a parable. Once upon a time, there was a farmer to whom an only son was born when he was rather advanced in age. As the child grew up, his parents became very fond of him. One day, the farmer was out working in the fields when a neighbor told him that his son was dangerously ill, indeed at the point of death. Returning home, he found the boy dead. His wife wept bitterly, but his own eyes remained dry. After a long while, the farmer said to his wife, "Do you know why I'm not crying? Last night I dreamt I had become a king and the father of 7 princes. These princes were beautiful as well as virtuous. They grew in stature and acquired wisdom and knowledge in the various arts. Suddenly I woke up. Now I have been wondering whether I should weep for those 7 children or this one boy." In other words, when our divine sight awakens, what we once perceived in the waking state will then appear like a dream. As Krishna described this illumined state in the 2nd chapter of the Gita, the recollected mind is awake in the knowledge of the Atman, which is dark night to the ignorant. The ignorant are awake in their sense life, which they think is daylight. To the seer, it is darkness. Now we come to verses 5 through 9. From Prakriti, the Gunas come forth, Sri Krishna tells us: Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. These are the bonds that bind the undying dweller, imprisoned in the body. Sattva, the shining, can show the Atman by its pure light. Yet Sattva will bind you to search for happiness, longing for knowledge. Rajas, the passionate, will make you thirsty for pleasure and possession. Rajas will bind you to hunger for action. Tamas, the ignorant, bewilders all men. Tamas will bind you with the bonds of delusion, sluggishness, stupor. The power of Sattva enslaves the happy. The power of Rajas enslaves the doers. The power of Tamas enslaves the deluded and darkens their judgment. The metaphysical principle of the Gunas is one of the most important concepts in the Gita. The Gunas are the fabric of Prakriti. But behind this universe is Brahman, the unchanging Atman within. For the knower of Brahman who sees Prakriti and Brahman as they are, there's no conflict. When Krishna tells us sattva, rajas, tamas, these are the bonds that bind. Once we know how the gunas work in the external and in our internal nature, they cease to bind us. That's the beauty. Meanwhile, all three gunas are present in each of us, and their interplay create the dynamics of our personality. In the human mind, one guna always predominates at any given time. One student may be normally calm and quiet, that would be sattva, but suddenly on the day of exams, restless and uneasy, that would be rajas. And then on the day when a disappointing grade comes, overcome with depression, that would be tamas. Even an avatar, a divine incarnation, demonstrates the play of the gunas, such as when Jesus, in a state of pava, was seized with divine anger and drove the money changers from the temple in Jerusalem. So how can we disentangle ourselves from the play of the gunas within ourselves? First of all, when we can identify and witness their expression in our minds, they begin to lose their hold over us. Just as in our meditation, when we were watching the lake of the mind, that attitude of witnessing the thoughts tells us, is proof that we have a mind, but we are not the mind. That is the clue. How can we overcome anxiety? Perhaps we're exposing ourselves to too much negative news, and so try to limit our input. If we feel restless or depressed, we understand it's the working of rajas or tamas and try to find the cause. Perhaps a feeling of loneliness that brings on an onset of depression, we can try to connect with loved ones on Zoom or be of service to someone with greater needs than ours at this time. By naming the guna that is afflicting us, we're suddenly no longer controlled by its mood. Sometimes tamas can be mistaken for sattva, but there's a world of difference between the two. A person who is quiet but without energy is torpid, tamasic. A sattvic person is energized but knows how to conserve that energy. Sri Ramakrishna explained how the three gunas work through one of his well-known parables. Once a rich man was walking through the forest when he was suddenly overtaken and surrounded by three robbers who stole his wealth. One of the robbers wanted to kill him on the spot, but the second robber said, no, there's no use killing him. Let's bind him and leave him here instead. All three robbers bound their victim with rope and left. After some time, the third robber returned and said to the rich man, oh, you're hurt. Let me release you and guide you out of the forest. The robber untied his hands and feet and took him to the highway, saying, follow this road and you will reach your home. The rich man was so filled with gratitude. He said, come with me to my home and be my guest. But the robber replied, no, I'll be arrested. You go alone. So saying, the robber left the rich man to find his own way home. These three robbers are the three gunas. Tamas wants to destroy. Rajas wants to bind us to the world so we forget God. But sattva shows us the spiritual path and frees us from bondage. Swami Prabhupada explained, though sattva shows us the way to liberation, it can also bind us with attachment to happiness and to the bliss that comes in meditation when the mind becomes absorbed in God. And this is a very important point, a very subtle point. He explained when aspirants become attached to that bliss, they reach an impasse in their spiritual lives and cannot proceed any further. That is the danger. In verses 10 through 13, Sri Krishna speaks to us. When sattva prevails over rajas, tamas, rajas and tamas, man feels that sattva. When rajas prevails over sattva and tamas, man is seized by that rajas. When tamas prevails over rajas and sattva, man yields to that tamas. When understanding shines in through the senses, the doors of the body, no sattva is present. In greed, in the heat of action, in eager enterprise, in restlessness, in all desire, no rajas, the ruler. When the mind is dark, bewildered, slothful, and lost in delusion, no tamas prevailing. So in the ordinary person, all three gunas operate at various times. They're interrelated like three sides of a triangle. When one side predominates, the other two sides fall back. When Sri Krishna tells us, when understanding shines in through the senses, the doors of the body, literally every gate of the body, no sattva is present. Here he means the body, again, described as the Upanishadic image of the city with the gates. In other words, the senses, the gateways for brilliant light of sattva to pour outward. What does that look like? Is this just fanciful imagery? We can look closely at the photos of Sri Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, Swami Vivekananda, and other direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna and see for ourselves. We find their most beautiful, most extreme expressions of sattva in the descriptions of Sri Ramakrishna in an exalted mood by Vaikuntanath Sanyal. He described, as moonlight makes the inside of a room a bit luminous, so the master's room at Dakshineshwar was illumined by his physical beauty. When the master was intoxicated by the joy of kirtan, we felt that his divine body was as bright as molten gold and as soft as cream. It was as if he were distributing among his devotees the nectar that he had brought from heaven. We then felt that his overflowing divine beauty had melted and was spreading over the devotees. Once there was an old man who wanted to enter the Madras Math, and one of the direct disciples allowed him. He was over age, but allowed him. And this old man, he was too old to meditate. But what did he do? He put up all the pictures of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Vivekananda, and all the direct disciples. And every morning, he would stand in front of each photograph and look at the eyes and meditate on those eyes, on that face for 2 minutes, and then move on. And he became a rishi. When sattva guna predominates in the natural world, at dawn and at dusk, when nature is at its calmest, the flow of prana within the human body becomes even. At most times of the day, we're breathing in and out only through one nostril. But at the Brahmaprana, 2 hours around sunrise and 2 hours around sunset, both nostrils are operating. And so the mind becomes its calmest. And that's the most auspicious time for meditation and spiritual practice. And with our spiritual routine, we are actually summoning forth the sattva guna by turning our mind inward. The mind at that time begins to flow in an upward current. And gradually, over time, the mind becomes practiced enough to seek out and regain that sattvic state of mind, even while engaged in the most intense activity. To actually be in a state of meditation while working. And if you have ever seen that, it's really something to behold. Usually we see it in a worshiper who has performed worship steadily every day over 3 years. There's something very fluid, very beautiful, very magical about their actions. To attain sattva, we must proceed step by step. For those who are full of tamas and lethargy, it's fruitless to talk about God. Instead, they should be encouraged to develop ambition and awaken activity, rajas. For those who are too rajasic, too restless, they can learn to perform work as karma yoga, a mixture of rajas and sattva. Swami Prabhupada said, selfless action or work performed as worship leads to a preponderance of sattva, which in turn inspires us to practice self-control and meditation. Then sattva helps us to transcend sattva itself. Verses 14 and 15. Sri Krishna speaks to us. That man who meets death in the hour of sattva goes to a sinless home among the saints of God. He who dies in rajas will be reborn among those whose bondage is action. He who dies in tamas will return to the womb of a dullard. So every moment of every day, we are shaping our destiny by what we think, what we speak, and what we act. But even the most wayward person who then comes into Vedanta and then struggles sincerely, it's a gift to witness such a person's passing, because we see a special grace comes at the time of death. It does work. We take one step and the Lord comes 100 steps towards us. But in the meantime, if our thoughts and actions are calm, dharmic and godly thoughts, sattva fashions our character. It's something we have to work towards. If we're greedy, restless, ambitious, and self-centered, then rajas forms our character. If we're deluded, dark, and ignorant, then tamas shapes our character. Naturally, at the moment of death, for most people, the most predominant guna of our character comes forth. Krishna says, he who dies in rajas will be reborn. How does that work? Now, birth, rebirth, the theory of reincarnation, that is a theory. One does not have to believe in it. It's a very good theory. Many mystics have understood their past lives, but it is not necessary to believe in the theory of reincarnation to be a Vedanta. Those with predominantly rajasic nature, having exhibited strong desire and attachment throughout their life, they are reborn. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find this illustrated. It illustrates death and reincarnation of those departing souls with marked rajasic or tamasic nature. The Upanishad describes, as a leech having reached the end of a blade of grass, takes hold of another blade and draws itself to it, so the self, having left this body behind it, unconscious, takes hold of another body and draws himself to it. In other words, we choose our families according to our past karma. A sattvic, pure-souled aspirant may not have attained illumination in life, but at death will go to a higher realm of existence called Brahmaloka, the realm of the personal God. Higher than that is union with Brahman, which transcends every plane of existence, including Brahmaloka. Swami Prabhavananda describes, those who through sattva attain illumination while living or at the moment of death have a very special passing. Illumined souls who have the vision of God live in that vision. If they talk, it is only of God, nothing else. Their consciousness of this world becomes obliterated, and there remains only God, one existence. Though they may at some time return to normal consciousness, when death approaches, they again have the vision of God and live in that right up to the moment of death. Now I'd like to end with a guided meditation that's very helpful in establishing us in the Sattva Guna. It was given by Vivekananda. It's a meditation on unity, and we find it in his 6 lessons on Raja Yoga. So let us begin, seated straight, spine straight, breathing in and out, very normally, 3 deep breaths in and exhaling completely. Everything we experience is based on the background fact of unity. Unity is within every experience and perception. Everything is a vibration, a wave in the ocean of unity. We can feel this here and now. Try to sit as firm as a rock. Feel nothing can move you. Breathe in, breathe out, mentally repeating, may all beings realize what is good. Hold the head and shoulders and the hips in a straight line, keeping the spinal column free. All action is along it, and it must not be impaired. Feel your body is an instrument rather than an obstacle to meditation. Know it to be pure, perfect, full of light. Mentally scan your body. Begin with your toes and think of each part of your body as pure and perfect. Picture it so in your mind, touching each part if you prefer to do so. And pass upward bit by bit until you reach the head, thinking of each part of the body as perfect, lacking nothing. Now scan your body for tension and send the light of awareness there so harmony returns. Feel your body as a harmonious system of energy. Don't superimpose solidity. Concentrate on any bodily sensation as being in the field of energy. Your feet on the floor, hands touching. Feel these points of contact as weightless and floating. Then think of the whole as perfect, an instrument to enable you to attain the truth, the vessel in which you are to cross the ocean and reach the shores of eternal truth. When this has been done, breathe in deeply and exhale completely. Take 4 such breaths, then breathe naturally. Try to feel the all-pervading unity in every thought perception and in your awareness of people and things in the room around you. Let every thought be dissolved in the vibratory ocean of unity. Feel how your mind becomes formless, pervading everything. When the mind becomes calm, the mind becomes formless, and we can then feel how the body floats within a sense of unity, within the mind and without. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us.